A young man holding a sledgehammer and a giant, monstrous trained spider creature attack a fully armed battle train with all their might, tearing off chunks of metal, destroying weapons, eliminating defenses. Nearby, a mob of enraged islanders with flaming torches and weapons approaches, furious and seeking revenge for the damage done to their perfect weapon, the weapon meant to free their island of a monster once and for all. Would this lead to more violence and bloodshed, or maybe something else entirely? They call him Charles, Choo Choo Charles, the eight-legged terror of Aranearum Island, half train, half giga spider, who some believe crawled up from the very depths of hell itself. He's been terrorizing the good folks of Aranearum for such a long time that most people living there can scarcely remember how long ago it all started. The monstrous creature has a steam train protecting his body, like a hard outer shell, as well as 8 black spindly legs that he can often be seen using to scurry around the island frighteningly fast. Despite the locomotive he has for a body, Charles doesn't need rails to get around, thanks to his spider legs. He also has been known to attack anyone who dares provoke him. Choo Choo Charles isn't above eating humans if they get too close to his mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. After so long being afraid of Choo Choo Charles, the residents of Aranearum have been planning his demise for some time. They hope that they can take him down and be free from Charles's reign of half-tarantula, half-train terror. But is Choo Choo Charles really that bad? Ask anyone who lives on the island and they'll probably tell you he's a monster, a man-eating predator who relentlessly scours the island looking for people just to scare them. And it's not hard to see why they all think that. But just like the residents, Charles lives on the island. He considers the whole of Aranearum his territory. He wanders around the entire breadth of the island, treating it as his own personal hunting ground. According to the locals, if anyone gets too close to Charles, he'll attack, but will usually retreat if he gets injured. Surely, if he was such an uncaring monster, he wouldn't let a little injury stop him. But what if the islanders living on Aranearum got it all wrong? What if Choo Choo Charles doesn't actually want to cause anyone harm and only attacks to defend himself? Or maybe he's protecting something else, something very, very precious. He can be quite a scary sight to look at, and maybe we shouldn't just assume that automatically makes him evil. After all, people look different too. The way we look doesn't determine whether someone is good or bad. The residents of Aranearum have been afraid of Charles just by looking at him. But what if, by attacking Charles without stopping to try to understand him, they were actually causing more harm than they realized? Sure, it's easy to say that none of that could ever possibly be true. Choo Choo Charles has just always been a monster, and everyone on the island knows it. They have to live with him crawling around there all day. But what if Choo Choo Charles is not a monster? Alex had grown up on the island, born and bred on the island of Aranearum, just like his mom and his dad. So just like everyone else, his whole life he'd been told stories of Choo Choo Charles, of the terrifying train monster that staked the island and feasted on human flesh. But Alex possessed something that not everybody else born on Aranearum shared, a curious and quizzical mind. Often at times his mom or dad warned him of the dangers of going around the island alone, especially after dark, that if he strayed too far from the house, Choo Choo Charles might come creepy crawling over the hill and get him. But every time they heard this, Alex always asked the same simple question: why? Even at a young age, Alex just couldn't understand why everyone on Aranearum was so afraid of Charles. Sure, he looked a little scary, especially in the low light of the nighttime, but then again, anyone could seem frightening the minute you turned down the lights. Alex couldn't get his head around the idea that Choo Choo Charles wanted to cause them harm. They hadn't done anything to Charles. They'd only ever seen the huge half-train, half-spider hybrid from their window a few times. At that distance, Charles hadn't looked much different in size to an ordinary house spider. And while he was certainly much bigger, that still didn't make Alex scared of him. Even from an early age, Alex recognized that if Charles really was a heartless monster set on destroying and devouring everyone in Aranearum, then why hadn't he done it already? Surely people wouldn't have been able to build themselves houses or set up railway tracks and work in mines on the island if Choo Choo Charles was really as bloodthirsty as the residents all seemed to think. Whenever Charles got closer, Alex could clearly see the so-called monster was big enough to easily demolish their family's home if he had wanted to. Charles wasn't exactly taller than the two-story structure, but he was all metal and spider legs. In one charge, he'd smash through all the wood the house had been built from. But while the thought that Choo Choo Charles could do that was scary on its own, he never did. As long as Alex stayed inside, Charles never paid any attention to the house, and it made him begin to wonder if Choo Choo Charles was really as bad as everyone had always said he was. "Choo Choo Charles wouldn't hurt me," Alex had said once to their mother and father, met with looks of concern from both parents. "He doesn't know me, so why would he hurt people if he doesn't know them?" Their parents had tried to explain, the same way they had been taught, that none of the islanders thought the same. They all believed that Choo Choo Charles really didn't think or behave like a human would, but Alex was already one step ahead. "Well, our dog Buddy, he isn't human, but he doesn't attack people either." A lot of the grown-ups on Aranearum didn't take too kindly to Alex's apparent empathy for their sworn nemesis, Choo Choo Charles. When Alex was still growing up, his parents would try and make up excuses for him, saying that he was much too young to fully understand or that he didn't mean it when they said the islanders shouldn't be so mean to Charles. But constantly being told that he was wrong never changed Alex's mind. To him, it seemed much stranger that everyone on the island was okay with the idea of causing Choo Choo Charles harm without even trying to understand him first. As Alex got older, he didn't let himself adopt the same anger and negativity toward Choo Choo Charles that everyone else had. One day, he heard that the residents of Aranearum were trying to come up with a plan to do away with Charles once and for all. Upset that his friends and neighbors would do something like that, Alex protested, telling everyone who would listen not to go through with the plan. It was then that his parents and a number of the other islanders tried to sit down with Alex and intervene. All the islanders told him to stop thinking about the part-trained spider-like monster with so much empathy. The Aranearum residents all shared stories about frightening encounters they'd had with Charles himself, the times they'd ventured out across Aranearum to try to vanquish their eight-legged enemy once and for all, only to be met with a vicious counterattack from Choo Choo Charles. But after all the older residents had told their tales of terror, Alex simply responded, "If you went out looking for Charles, meaning to do him harm, is it any surprise he fought back? He's a living creature just like all of us. But if he wanted to hurt people, there'd be a lot less of us around on this island." This was, of course, met with outrage from many of the island's elders. They all denounced Alex's way of thinking, claiming that he was too soft on Choo Choo Charles and that he would soon change his tune if the steam train-wearing spider creature ever came close to hurting Alex. So, while Alex was out of the room, his parents and the other Aranearum leaders devised a plan to turn Alex to their way of thinking. They would send him out across the island with an old camera, the kind that prints out a photo straight away. Their challenge was Alex had to get themselves close enough to Charles to take a photo with him. If he was able to do that and make it back alive, then the other islanders would consider that maybe Choo Choo Charles wasn't a monster after all. His parents begged him not to go, reminding their grown child that all he had to do was accept the truth and agree Charles was a monster. But Alex humbly agreed to the challenge and set off with his camera to find Choo Choo Charles. Traveling across Aranearum during the day made it a little harder to find Charles, but Alex knew it wasn't going to take long for the sun to set and night to fall on the island. He knew to search near some of the old Charles Mining Company mines, set up by the illustrious industrialist Warren Charles III. Most of the people living on the island had worked for him at some point, or still did. Alex's father had even used to be a mine worker, so he decided to head off toward the site his dad used to work at to start his search for Choo Choo Charles. While he hiked across the island, Alex knew that there was only a slim chance he'd change the islanders' minds about Charles. Even if he made it back with the photo, there was no guarantee everyone would just happily agree that they'd been wrong this whole time and go on to live peacefully with the half-train, half-spider hybrid. But even though there was only a small chance he could change the other residents' minds, it was enough. Alex still felt it was worth trying, especially if there was the possibility it would make things on the island better for everyone, including Choo Choo Charles. He lived here too, after all. It didn't take long for Alex to stumble across some tracks left in the ground by numerous heavy spider legs. The sun was starting to slowly dip behind the horizon, and pretty soon it would be too dark to follow the tracks all the way. So, moving with more speed, Alex started hiking in the direction the tracks seemed to be leading. He passed the mine that his dad had once worked at, grabbing an old torch that had been left there and using it to light his way as it started to get darker and darker still. To Alex's surprise, the tracks continued past the mine, further inland. His father had always told him that he and the mine workers had to fight off Choo Choo Charles because he came to attack them at the mines. But it seemed that Charles only ever passed the mines by. He would have only attacked if the workers provoked him first. Following the tracks even further, Alex was led toward a cavern a short distance away from the mine. This one looked like it had been dug by something big coming up from underground, instead of a cave or an entrance to a mine. And as Alex drew closer to the cavern, there came the sound of scuttling spider legs from inside. He held up his torch to the entrance, and the light seemed to reflect back from somewhere deep within the tunnel. But it was only when Alex lowered his torch again that he realized there was another source of light, one that was coming closer and closer, until Choo Choo Charles burst out of the cavern, eyes blazing like headlamps. Even though he wasn't convinced that Choo Choo Charles would harm him, the surprise of seeing him charging out of the cavern caused Alex to stagger back. As he did, his foot caught on the root of a nearby tree, causing him to topple over and land on his back. From the ground, he saw Choo Choo Charles coming toward him, towering above on his many legs. looking as fearsome as ever. Despite all his empathy, even Alex had to admit he did look terrifying, especially from down here. But he tried to remain calm, to not panic. Instead, he stayed as still as he could, not moving a muscle. Charles came right up close to Alex, snarling with the sound of a high-pitched train whistle. He was so close that Alex could feel the terrifying train creature's warm breath against his face, but they did their best to stay calm. He didn't want to make any sudden movements or do anything that could make Charles think he was there to cause him harm. It was easy for Alex to hold on to his nerve, but despite getting so close in an attempt to scare him away, Choo Choo Charles certainly wasn't attacking. Raising both hands above his head, nice and slowly, showing that he didn't intend any harm, Alex gradually started to stand up. Charles stood before him, backing away slightly on his rear legs, clearly uncertain about what was going on. Alex felt bad. It was obvious that Choo Choo Charles was so used to humans attacking him on sight that coming across one who didn't was almost alien to the ginormous spider creature. Back on his feet, Alex slowly lowered his hands a little, reaching out toward Charles to give him a reassuring pat on the nose. This was something he'd always done with his family dog, Buddy. At first, Charles recoiled a little further, backing into the cavern that he'd come out of. Alex didn't step closer, though. He knew Choo Choo Charles was fiercely territorial, and he likely only ever attacked because he thought the islanders were trying to get into his home. Instead, Alex just reached out one hand and waited for the spider-legged steam train to come to him. Charles spent a few moments twitching uncomfortably, unsure of how to react to patience and kindness he'd never gotten from a human before. But eventually, the creature seemed to step in closer, using its 8 legs to approach Alex's outstretched hand with caution. This wasn't an attack, definitely not the same level of hostility Charles had been met with by the island's other inhabitants. He crept closer until he felt Alex's hand gently boop against his nose. Much to both their surprise, Charles seemed to be reassured by this gesture. "Well, hi there," Alex said softly. "You must be Choo Choo Charles. I've heard stories about you all my life, but it's very nice to meet you face to face. I'm Alex." Even more surprising, Charles opened his mouth and let out a low, growling sound. "Alex." A moment later, Charles had backed away again, although this time it seemed to be more of an invitation for Alex to step inside the cavern. He accepted, slowly walking past the entrance and into Choo Choo Charles's lair. Although he had always advocated that Charles was more than the mindless beast everyone thought, even Alex was surprised at just how intelligent the creature appeared to be. It wasn't as if he was like a dog, like Buddy. He didn't have to be trained. He understood things like encouraging a guest to enter his territory once he knew they weren't a threat. He could even speak a little, even if it was only in single, broken words. "Follow," Charles rasped. He turned and began to scuttle back down the cavern the way he'd arrived, and Alex started walking at a loose distance behind him. Keeping the torch hoisted, he scanned the area around him while following Choo Choo Charles as he led him further and further into his home. It was hard to ignore all the horrible stories Alex had been told about Charles over the years, and there was still a worry the spider-legged steam engine was luring him into his lair to attack. But Alex reminded himself that all those old stories had come from people who wouldn't dare to ever get this close to Charles. And if he had wanted to attack, he would have done so already. As he descended further underground with Charles, Alex figured they must be alongside the mine tunnel by now. He soon noticed another source of light coming from somewhere up ahead. This time, he knew not to assume it was just the light from the torch reflecting back at him. Besides, this was more like a warm glow of a fire than the bright beam of an electric bulb. "What's that up ahead?" he asked out loud. Charles might have been able to speak in fragments, but full sentences seemed to be a challenge to him. Instead, he just repeated, "Follow." Before long, Alex would soon see the answer to the question himself anyway. Led by Choo Choo Charles, he turned a corner and the cavern opened into a wide chamber, lit by that warm orangey-red glow. The place was filled with thousands upon thousands of eggs, their light illuminating what seemed to be a nest. It all made sense now. Alex's countless theories and defenses of Choo Choo Charles seemed to have been pretty close to the truth. The only reason the half-train, half-spider hybrid had ever attacked the islanders was all because he had been protecting his eggs. They were his family. Charles seemed to be waiting for some kind of response, almost like he knew Alex would need a moment to take everything in. Then, after looking around at the eggs, he turned to Charles and said, "I understand, and I'm very sorry." It was impossible for Alex to not take pity on the creature. After all, it had spent who knows how many years being attacked and persecuted, and all for trying to defend the rest of his kind. No doubt, the eggs were all filled with other spider creatures like Choo Choo Charles, but Alex quickly realized the fact that there weren't any other giant arachnids roaming around free in Aranearum was probably because they still needed time to hatch. Charles was just the warden, protecting the future generations of his spidery species, and if the islanders kept on attacking him on sight and encouraging others to do so, then one day there would be none of the creatures left. With a heavy heart, Alex produced the camera. If the other residents of the island needed photographic proof to be convinced that Charles wasn't a monster, then it was photographic proof they would get. Setting the camera on a time delay, Alex stood next to Charles, the creature calmly staying still until the flash fired and the photo started printing. Choo Choo Charles got a little spooked at this, but Alex was able to quickly reassure him. It didn't take long for the giant spider to realize the flash wasn't the spark of an attack. Certain they were now on somewhat friendly terms, Alex took a few more photos of the rest of the cavern and the vast numbers of eggs hidden within. He planned on bringing all these pictures before the elders of Aranearum and relay the situation in full. He would explain that Choo Choo Charles wasn't a monster, just that he was protecting his eggs, and that in a few years' time those eggs would hatch into more like him. So rather than fight back against them, the islanders would be much better off sailing to the mainland, starting new lives away from Aranearum, and handing the island over to the spiders so they could live there in peace. After all, who knew how long these eggs had been there? They had probably been on Aranearum long before any humans started living there. Having gathered up as many photos as he could before the camera ran out of film, Alex went to wish his newfound friend goodbye. "I'll speak to them on your behalf," he reassured Charles. "I can't promise it'll go well, but I can promise that I'll try. They're stubborn people, set in their ways, and they don't like being told that they're wrong. It's likely they won't want to leave the island, but if I can explain that you don't mean them harm, the least they might do is leave you alone." Although he couldn't be sure that Choo Choo Charles had understood every word, Alex was pleased to hear a growled response from the train-wearing tarantula. "Alex, friend." With that, making sure he had all the photos of Charles, the cavern, and the eggs, Alex set out on the hike back home to speak to the other residents of Aranearum. But what he found on the way home was far more heartbreaking than they could have imagined. As Alex hiked his way back to his family home, he overheard the sounds of metal clanging. It sounded like someone was hammering away, using tools to build something, so he took a diversion from his route to investigate. Sure enough, he came across some of the inhabitants of the island, toiling away in an old train yard. They looked to have been restoring one of the old steam trains that the mine workers had used to transport raw materials up and down Aranearum on train tracks that spanned the entire breadth of the island. Assisting with the work were a few faces Alex recognized, including his parents, helping to weld and attach components to the locomotive. Alex was unsure why or what any of this could be for, but gave in to his curiosity and went to take a close look. At least he'd be able to quickly explain the situation with Charles to their family first. But as Alex got closer, he overheard some of the islanders talking. He hid out of view so that he could eavesdrop. A few were apparently speculating on whether Alex would make it back alive or if he'd be eaten by Choo Choo Charles. They all thought Alex was a fool for thinking the giant spider creature wasn't a monster. Hurtfully, neither of Alex's parents stood up for him. Both his mother and his father kept quiet. As the other Aranearum residents spoke, they revealed that this had been their plan all along. They'd sent Alex away so they could get on with their plans to take care of Choo Choo Charles once and for all. Without Alex there to protest, the other islanders had started to work on a train that they would use to take the fight to Charles. So when Alex had been off searching for the eight-legged creature, the residents had been affixing weapons and armor to their train, modifying it so it would travel a lot faster on the tracks and stay out of Charles's reach, while dealing him a lot of damage. Worst and most upsetting of all, the residents talked about how they were never going to change their minds, even if Alex did manage to return with the photos he'd been sent to gather. If he did, the elders just wanted to use the pictures to determine where Choo Choo Charles was hiding, so they could hunt him down and continue their ongoing battle. Deeply upset and worried for his new friend, Alex kept hidden. He pulled out one of the photos, the one of him next to Charles. He didn't care what it took. He couldn't let the other islanders kill Choo Choo Charles. He knew he wasn't a monster. He was just defending his eggs, so it would have to fall to Alex to defend Charles. He waited for nightfall and the sun to set on Aranearum once again. The islanders' battle train was still incomplete, so the group who had been working on it all made their way back to their homes to get some sleep. Once his former friends and ex-neighbors were all far enough away, Alex got out from his hiding place and made his way toward the train. It had been built with a horrible purpose in mind, and for that reason it made Alex sad and even angry to look at it. He clambered aboard, examining where the islanders had attached all their various upgrades to make the train tough enough to fight with Choo Choo Charles. It was barbaric, and Alex knew what he had to do. Picking up a sledgehammer someone had left laying nearby, Alex hoisted the heavy tool over his shoulder and brought it down in a powerful swing. He knocked the armor plates loose, broke weapons, and damaged the defenses the residents had been installing. He had to destroy this train, before the residents of Aranearum used it to destroy Charles. Speaking of, the 8-legged steam engine had been roaming nearby, leaving the safety of his cavern for the night. Knowing that there'd be fewer humans around who meant him harm, Choo Choo Charles scurried across the landscape of the island toward the source of the sound, recognizing his human friend as he saw him in the distance using a heavy hammer to break apart a train. Panting with exhaustion, Alex wiped the sweat from his forehead as he took a quick breather. Breaking apart this battle train was hard work, but he had all night ahead of him, and it'd be worth it to help protect Charles. To his surprise, he turned to see his spidery steam train friend peering at him through the windows of the locomotive cabin. Choo Choo Charles was clearly curious about what was going on. "Charles," Alex said in a hushed whisper, "there isn't much time. The other people on the island built this train to hurt you, but I know that if I can just explain to them you don't mean any harm, I can get them to leave you alone. In the meantime, we need to destroy this thing. Help me break it apart, piece by piece if we have to." "Break?" Charles echoed. With an enthusiastic nod, Alex swung his sledgehammer again, breaking one of the turrets and knocking it clean off the battle train in one fell swoop. He looked back at Charles, hoping that his demonstration had worked. In response, the creature lifted the front pair of its large spider legs and began to tear at the metal of the train. With some effort, Charles was able to rip the roof over the train's cabin in 2 pieces, peering down at Alex from above with a grin of razor-sharp teeth. It had worked. Charles knew what to do, so working together, the pair of them set about destroying the train. It took many intense hours of work for the half-spider, half-steam engine hybrid and their one human friend to gradually dismantle the dangerous locomotive. Alex was able to knock away smaller parts with his sledgehammer, while he directed Choo Choo Charles to pull apart and smash the main body of the train with his supernatural strength. Even though it would likely take all night, Alex was amazed at how much headway they were making together. Working alone, he knew he'd only be able to slow down the islanders' progress with the battle train, but now, thanks to Charles's help, it looked like there'd be nothing left but a pile of scrap metal when they were done. The islanders would have to start rebuilding from scratch, and that gave Alex more time to talk to them about Choo Choo Charles and his eggs. Suddenly, there came a sound of yelling and commotion from nearby. Both Alex and Charles froze, turning to look at where it had came from. Somebody had heard them taking apart the battle train and had rushed back to alert the other islanders, and now the glow of flaming torches was getting closer as the residents of Aranearum approached, forming an angry mob. Alex climbed down from the train's cabin, leaping back down to ground level. They noticed Choo Choo Charles rearing back on his spider legs, frighteningly backing away from the islanders as they marched toward him, shouting and waving their torches in the air. Alex held out a hand to calm down the steam engine-wearing spider, and Charles leaned forward slightly so Alex could boop his nose. He turned and walked toward the angry mob as the islanders got closer, then shouted as loud as they could for them to stop. Shocked to see one of their own standing in their way, the crowd came to a halt. Scanning their faces, Alex spotted his parents, disappointed that he was taking part in this too. Holding up the photos, Alex explained to everyone the truth. Choo Choo Charles was not a monster. The islanders yelled. Some of them booed and said that Alex was wrong and that Charles was vicious. So Alex pointed over a few feet away where Charles stood. He wasn't vicious. He was only attacking because he was scared, just trying to protect his young. And much in the same way, the islanders had only attacked Charles because they were scared of him and were trying to protect their homes and families. But you all need to realize we aren't so different. Nothing good can come from fighting amongst ourselves. But when we work together, we can build and we can help protect without hurting each other. It took a few short moments of silence. Then Alex's parents put down their torches. Soon the rest of the islanders all did the same. They now had realized how wrong they'd been. Alex explained the situation, that Choo Choo Charles was protecting his eggs, and one day they would hatch into more spider creatures like him. Although the elders took some convincing, Alex told them that it'd be better if they left Aranearum behind and set sail for the mainland. So the islanders packed up everything they could carry onto boats, ready to leave Choo Choo Charles on the island. And as they shipped off, Alex waved his 8-legged friend goodbye for one last time.